not able to hear me. Yes, that's that factory noise. This week we're focusing our attention in the factories that were in the north. Factories were in the north largely because cotton. Okay, so remember the South was spending money on their agriculture and on slaves, and so thus they didn't have any money to spend on factories. The North built factories because they're near river systems. So we're looking at areas such as Massachusetts, we're looking at Connecticut, we're looking at Maine and some of those states. So our focus this week is on the working conditions, factory working conditions. So in this case, we're looking at who's working in these factories. And it may surprise you, but most of the people working in the factories at the time were young women. Why women? Well, women were sent from their families to go off to these factories because it was an opportunity for them to make money and perhaps come back and bring the money to the factories. So we're going to focus specifically on what were called the Lowell factories. Now these women who went to the factories to work encountered something they'd never seen before. Most of these women were from farms. And so they're going into what was considered a large city at the time, and there was at least 7 large factories, which we'll be taking a look at. The working conditions were nothing like working on a farm. And so one of the things we're going to be taking a look at is the noise, actually what they had to work with, these spindles and sticking their hands in machines and using these bobbins and once again sticking their hands in machines that possibly could cut their hands off at any given time. So we'll be looking at how dangerous the working conditions are, but there's a flip side. Some of these women were actually able to gain some types of freedom because even though they were working many, many hours, they also had time to perhaps read, go to book studies and things like that. Seems kind of bizarre, but that's really what happened. They had freedoms because they were not living at home. They were actually living in what were called dormitories at the time. Somewhat similar to a college dormitory, but there were some subtle differences, curfews, things like that. So we're going to be taking a look at that. As we take a look at it, one of the things we're going to find out is about their actual hours, as I referred to before. We're going to take a look at the fact that they were working sometimes 10, 11, 12, 13 hours. And these are young girls. Why would they want to subject themselves to that? They're making money. As I said, we go back to that idea of freedom. So they have these new opportunities. Unfortunately, especially in Lowell, the average lifespan for a woman working in these factories was about 23 years old. So if you worked in the factory, there's a good chance you could be hurt. There's a good chance that, as you're going to see in a video, that they were breathing in fibers and they could become sick because they could get emphysema, a lot of lung-borne diseases. Life wasn't all that good, but if you survived, you made money. There was one other catch here. The woman could actually find a husband, and this once again was an opportunity to get away from her family and find a husband, maybe marry into wealth. Didn't always happen that way. As we're going to see, we're going to read a story about somebody named Marilla Taylor who actually worked in the factory. As we find out in her letters, everything seems good. Nobody hears from her for a while. She ends up dying. So we have factory work. People in the South would say that's no different than what's in the South because these factory workers had a lot of restrictions on them. And they said, well, you know, they're almost being paid like slaves. It's very similar to slavery. So we're going to contrast the difference between the North and the South this week, looking specifically at factories and looking at work conditions, culminating with doing your Google slide presentation, looking at current work conditions around the world.